things on prison camps. So hopefully eventually I'll do some more about the Elmira prison camp and maybe eventually even have a book about it. But I'm going to give you some information tonight about things I've learned about the Elmira Civil War prison camp, which was known as, became known as Elmira. It's one of the worst prison camps in the North for Confederate soldiers. It was a 24% death rate, which is one of the highest rates of any Union prison. During the Civil War, Elmira was a supply depot for training troops to go off to the war. And Elmira was kind of a good location. It was pretty much kind of directly north of Washington, D.C. There were many rail lines that came to Elmira from all different directions, and they could send the troops south down to the front in Virginia. This is a photograph of the. It really was taken when it was still a training ground for troops, and they're just practicing their artillery routine. It was not a prison camp at this time. It's pictured in this way. There were 4 different barracks in Elmira. I've listed them all here. The one that's of interest to us is the one that was known as Camp Rathbun. It was a little bit west of the city of Elmira at the time. It had 20 barracks, 2 mess halls, 2 guardhouses. This is the one that will become the prison camp. The other camps also still had troops in them. So while you had a prison camp in Elmira, you also had other barracks hosting Union troops in Elmira. Here's a drawing of the Elmira prison camp when it was the Camp Rathbun. And this is there's a street right here called Water Street in Elmira. And there's a pond that was in the middle of the camp called Foster's Pond. The property was owned by the Foster family, and they leased the land to the state to use as a camp for soldiers, and eventually becomes the prison camp. Here's a photograph of the camp. Again, this is before it was a prison camp. You can see the small fence here. You see barracks for the soldiers. Some of them are housed in tents. There's a flagpole right here. This flagpole would stand right at the entrance to the prison camp. This is a soldier's letter that was published in the New York Times in May 1861, just before the prison camp has begun. And it talks about Elmira taking on a very martial appearance. A lot of troops were coming in from all over the place, and it really helped change the town of Elmira. I mean, Elmira went from being basically a village to a city. In 1864, Elmira becomes incorporated as a city because all the activity comes in because of the war. In the first years of the Civil War, they didn't really keep prisoners. You were exchanged or you were paroled. So if you had a battle and you captured 50 of the enemy, and they captured 50 of your men, you just exchanged them, 50 for 50. But if you had one side that had 50 men, the other side had 100 men, now you had a problem. They exchanged 50 for 50, what do you do with the 50 left over? You paroled them. They signed a document, a piece of paper, that said they were paroled. They promised that they would go home and they wouldn't fight again until they were properly exchanged. So, you got paroled. Here's a parole paper for a Confederate soldier from Alabama, promising that he won't take up arms until he's properly exchanged. Here's one for a Union soldier who was captured. And he's promising that he'll do the same thing. He won't fight until he gets exchanged. This is kind of the exchange basis. If you're an officer, it took more men to get you exchanged. If you had a general and they had a general, you just exchanged a general for general. If you didn't have a general, 46 privates would do the trick. And so on down the line. So, almost like trading baseball cards or something here. 46 privates for one general, and that's what they did. This is where, one site where it happened. This is Aiken's Landing on the James River. A boat would come in, a steamboat would come in with a white flag flying, and they would bring in prisoners, and they had all the paperwork there, and they would exchange prisoners. And they had sites like this where they would exchange their prisoners. Now, the soldiers learned fairly quickly that war was not a whole lot of fun when people were shooting at you. So if you didn't like what was happening to you, you got yourself captured. Then you could get paroled, then you got to go home. Well, the Army caught on this pretty quickly and said, well, this doesn't work so well for us. So they established parole camps. If you got paroled, you went to the parole camp. You didn't go home. They kept you close to the front. So when you did get exchanged, they could put you right back in the unit fairly quickly, and you're right back in the war again. didn't have to wait for you to travel all the way from Iowa to get back to your unit again. So this was convenient for the Army. The soldiers hated this. Essentially, you're a prisoner of your own army. They put you in this camp and they had you under guard and you're staying in barracks. You're just like a prisoner of war, but your own army was doing it to you. This is Camp Parole was in Annapolis, in Maryland. There's a drawing of the parole camp in Annapolis. You see the barracks, and they were held basically prisoner by their own army here. Everything changes when Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. He decided to issue it after the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862. It goes into effect on January 1st, 1863. The change here is that he's now going to allow the use of African-American troops in the Union Army. And that becomes a problem because when the Confederates capture these black soldiers, they don't treat them the same as white soldiers. They refuse to exchange or parole them. They just keep them. And they sell them back into slavery, or they force them to do labor, or they kill them. This is the Fort Pillow Massacre, Tennessee, April 12, 1864. Some black soldiers were overwhelmed in this fort. They tried to surrender. Confederate soldiers slaughtered them all. They bayoneted and shot them to death. This was the army was led by Nathan Bedford Forrest, who later was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. Some historians argue Forrest didn't really condone this, he didn't approve it. Others say that he did. So there's kind of a debate to this day about whether Nathan Bedford Forrest really allowed this to happen or not. But it happened. And these guys were all slaughtered, even their white arms. Lincoln's insisting you need to treat these black soldiers the same as all other soldiers. They need to be exchanged and paroled. They need to be treated as prisoners, the same as other prisoners. You can't just slaughter them like this. It's not right. The Confederacy's policy towards capturing African-American soldiers said that all Negroes taken in arms and be handed over to the authorities of the states where they're captured to be dealt with according to the laws thereof. In other words, sell them back into slavery. Lincoln's insisting that this is the policy that needs to be followed. The law of nations and civilized powers permit no distinction as to color to treat the prisoners of war as public enemies. You have to treat them the same. In May 1863, then, the Union suspended the exchange of prisoners. Both sides now stopped exchanging and paroling prisoners. They start stuffing them into these prison camps. And that's where we're going to have a problem, because neither side is ready for this. And the conditions in these camps become absolutely horrible on both sides. General Grant didn't really like paroling prisoners. He wrote, "We've got to fight for the military power of the South is exhausted. The release or exchange prisoners captured it simply becomes a war of discrimination." In Grant's mind, exchanging prisoners back to the South only helps the South. It's the North's advantage to keep those men and force the South to replace them, because they have fewer numbers. The North can replace their men more easily than the South can. And Secretary of War Edwin Stanton agreed with Grant. He believed that prisoner exchange would only help the Confederacy. We need to think about maybe not doing that anymore. These are General Orders number 100, also known as Lieber's Code. During the Civil War, they came up with this code about how to treat, kind of rules of warfare, essentially. And part of that was how to treat prisoners. It said a prisoner of war is subject to no punishment for being a public enemy, or is any revenge wreaked upon him by the intentional infliction of suffering or disgrace, by cruel imprisonment, want of food, by mutilation, death, or any other barbarity. Both sides are not going to follow this to the letter. In the North, we're going to find, and even in the South, prisoners were denied food. Prisoners were sometimes punished in a rather cruel way, like hanging them by their thumbs. Here's a map that shows a number of prisons. It doesn't show all of them, but the one that we're concerned about is right here. Here's Elmira. And another one that's kind of noteworthy is number 8 right here in Georgia. This is one that becomes known as Andersonville. There were 5 types of prison camps. One was a stockade, which is what Anderson was. They put up a big wooden fence, a stockade fence, and they put the prisoners inside, and there you go. You're on your own. There was no shelter, nothing. The soldiers in Andersonville, the Union soldiers there, were on their own to make shelter. Some of them, the shelter was simply a hole in the ground, like a foxhole. They just lived in it. So it's pretty awful conditions. Another type were fortifications. or converted to prisons, like Fort Delaware was the old abandoned fort that was turned into a prison camp. Old buildings, like Lincoln Prison in Richmond, was an old tobacco warehouse where prisoners were kept. At one time, one of the commanders of Lincoln Prison was Abraham Lincoln's brother-in-law. He used to shoot at Union prisoners and they stuck their head in the window. Another type of camp was just using tents, like Point Lookout, Maryland. Just a camp full of tents that Confederate prisoners were kept at. And enclosed barracks, which is what Elmira was. You had regular wooden buildings. They had them built already for the troops at Elmira, and they're going to use those barracks now to house prisoners. The problem with Elmira is there's not enough barracks to go around for the number of men that get stuffed into the camp. Here's Andersonville. You can see these guys are just making their own kind of shelters with cloth and making their own kind of tents. This wooden fence was called the dead line. You were not to cross that. Cross that dead line, they just shot you. No questions asked. Some men couldn't take it being in this camp. They purposely crossed the dead line so they could be shot. This guy was the Union Commissary General of Prisoners during the Civil War, Colonel William Hoffman. Ironically, he started out the war a prisoner himself. He was in Texas. When Texas seceded from the Union, he was made a prisoner by the Confederates. He was exchanged in August 1862, and he becomes the Commissary General of Prisoners of War for the Union Army. He was answerable to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Prisoners were brought to Elmira on the Erie Railroad. This Erie Railroad station in Elmira. That's how it looked in the early 1900s. This building's still there. This is it today. It's kind of abandoned. Windows are all bricked up. This building's still there near the McDonald's on Main Street in Elmira. Here's another picture of it. So let's see, it says Elmira on the front of it. Hopefully this building is going to get restored someday and preserved. Abraham Lincoln once went through this train station. He was returning from his Cooper Union address in the 1860s when he was running for president. He came back home to Illinois on the Erie Railroad and he stopped at Binghamton, Elmira, and was right by this railroad station. So the Confederates came into the railroad station right here, and they marched down Main Street. The prison camp was over here. They came right down Main Street here and out Water Street to the prison camp. And here you see Foster's Pond right along the Chemung River. This is a drawing by a Confederate prisoner of the camp. And you see the squares there of the barracks. This is the Foster's Pond. This became a problem. It was basically a stagnant pond that's sitting in the camp. It became very polluted. Not a very good statistic, but the surgeon at the camp estimated that the prisoners in the camp passed about 5,000 gallons of urine every day. And a lot of it's going into this pond. So it's kind of poisoning the well water that's near the pond, and they're drinking this water. These right here were the sinks, in other words, the latrines, right next to the pond. This is the mess hall, and these were hospital buildings over here. This is another map of the camp that's on a monument in Elmira near the site of the camp. And you see the main entrance is right here. Here's Water Street. Right here they show a little dotted line. That's a tunnel that was dug by some prisoners who escaped by digging their way out. Came up this tunnel, got out on the Water Street, and away they went. Here you see Chemung River in the background. Smallpox hospital. Smallpox will break out and they'll isolate the prisoners by putting them beyond the pond, away from the rest of the prison population, to try to keep it from spreading. Here's a photograph of the camp. You see some of the men, Confederate soldiers, milling around outside. Here's the flagpole entrance to the camp. This is Water Street right here. Here's the fence, a little bigger than the one I showed you earlier. It's just a place for training troops. This is the main entrance here. This is where the guard was. They show the guard a piece of paper drawing that go in and out of the camp. This is the original flagpole that you saw in the photograph. It's at a monument near the Elmira Water Board on Windsor Ave in Elmira today. It's a little shorter than it was back then. It's been hit by lightning several times, and it's lost some of the size. This is where the flagpole stood originally. This is the original spot of the entrance to the camp where the flagpole was. It's in the backyard of somebody's house on Water Street, and kind of near the garage. It's on private property. This is the Foster house. The family that owned the property the camp was put on. And that house is still there today. You still see it. The interesting thing in this picture is this structure right here. They built this tower. Some businessmen got some money together and built a tower. And they charged people admission to climb up to the top. You can look at the prisoners over here. They even had like spy glasses up there you can use to watch them. So they charge you 10 cents to go up in this tower. Another company built a bigger one, a 3-story one, a little further down the street, and charged people 15 cents to go up in it. Eventually that one was taken down. But, people along here were selling like lemonade and beer and whiskey and cakes and stuff like that. And they were bringing people down here all the time by wagon from the hotels in Elmira to come gawk at the Confederate prisoners. And the prisoners didn't like it very much. So they brought people and charged them 10 cents. And some days they collected $40. You got 400 people coming down here, climbing this tower to look at it. I read an article recently about some of the prisoners in the camp, some of their diaries. And one guy talked about he had an uncle in Utica. And somehow he got a letter from his uncle saying he wanted to see him, but they wouldn't let citizens into the camp. So he smuggled a letter back out to his uncle telling him about this tower. The uncle came to Elmira, went up in the tower, and could see his nephew in the camp, and they waved to each other. And that's the last time he got to see his uncle. He passed away before he died. This is the Foster House today. It's a Arnett Medical Center today, so it's all, the building's all been restored. They did a great job with it. You can still see this building. It's right across the street from the main entrance to the camp. The prisoners knew these people were looking at them, so they decided to give a little show, and they would do juggling acts and stuff like that, doing acrobatics and things, and give them some entertainment. I read about one account, a few of the Confederates got together and they got some gray cloth they put over and they made themselves look like an elephant. They were walking across here like they're swinging a trunk. They put on a show for the people in the town. They thought it was pretty funny. So on July 6, 1864, the first prisoners arrived in Elmira, 399 men. One died on the way. By the end of July, there's 4,000. By mid-August, there's 9,600. And yet the commander of the camp had told Colonel Hoffman, the commissary general of prisoners, we could take maybe 5,000 men. He says almost 10,000 for the camp. It's just too many. The barracks would hold 4,000 or 5,000 men. He gets nearly 10,000 sent here. Officials had a resort to putting them in tents. And here's the wall of the camp. Look how close these tents are to the wall. The guards were mostly veteran reserve corps. These were men who'd gotten wounded in the war, lost an arm or a leg or a hand, and they couldn't serve in the regular army anymore, but they could do some light duty, and often they served as guards in camps like this. There were 780 men. Eventually it would be more than that. There would be about 2,000 men working as guards in camps. You got to remember, there's also a lot of other soldiers in town, these other barracks. So if they needed more men, if a problem arose in the camp, they had lots more soldiers they could call upon to make sure the prisoners stayed under control. They also had a couple hundred African American troops acting as guards in the camp as well. One of the members of the Veteran Reserve Corps was this guy named Deal. They called him old peg leg. He lost a leg in combat. Prisoners didn't like him at all. He would do mean things like call him out at midnight to take a roll call. It took a long time, just to be a nuisance to us. Here's a roll call happening. They're lined up for a roll call. The first commander of the camp was Lieutenant Colonel Seth Eastman. And he's the one that told Hoffman we can take maybe 5,000 men, and then Hoffman said 10,000. He only served for a short time because his health was not very good. He was a career Army officer. He served quite a bit out in the Midwest. but his health was not particularly well. He really wasn't up to the task, so he's going to only stay there a couple months and he's going to be gone. But he was a rather accomplished artist, a painter. When he was out in the Midwest, he often did paintings of Native Americans. One of his paintings that he did. I can't even see the numbers, so he was pretty good. There's another one of his landscape paintings. Yeah, one of his paintings hangs in the Rockwell Museum in Corning, New York. His wife's an interesting character. She's a Southerner. And she didn't like the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. She thought it was just a pack of lies about slavery, as most Southerners did. But she wrote her own book about slavery, Aunt Phyllis's Cabin, or Southern Life as It Is. She defended slavery and the whole Southern way of life. This is the cover to her book. Aunt Phyllis's Cabin. Slaves are dancing, they're as happy as that could be slaves. You have a little different version of slavery in Harriet Beecher Stowe. To replace Eastman, this man is brought in, Colonel Benjamin Tracy from Appalachian, New York. He served with 109th New York, later served with 127 U.S. colored troops. He won the Medal of Honor for his service in the Battle of the Wilderness, which was awarded some years after the Civil War was over with, but he did win the Medal of Honor. And one reason he's brought in is because Henry Raymond, who was the founder of the New York Times, really pushed to get Tracy named, because he believed that, like himself, Tracy was a proponent of retaliation against Confederate prisoners. Hearing about what's happening to Union soldiers in places like Andersonville, we need to do some things to retaliate to them for what they're doing to our soldiers. And Edward Stanton was a supporter of this as well. Here's Tracy later on in the cabinet of President Harrison. He was the Secretary of the Navy. Now, he was in the Army, but now he's the Secretary of the Navy. I'm not sure how that worked out, but somehow he got to be Secretary of the Navy. And in 1890, when they dedicated the statue of Robert E. Lee on Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia, as Secretary of the Navy, he refused to allow the U.S. Navy band to participate in the ceremony. Even in 1890, he still had these hard feelings about the war. He didn't want that Navy band playing there, he told him he's not going to do it. Another interesting character at Elmira was this guy named Eugene Sanger, the camp surgeon. When the camp first opened on July 6, 1864, there was no doctor there. These guys came into the camp, thousands of them, and there's no doctor until August 8th when he finally gets there. One prisoner quoted this about Sanger. He said that Sanger said to him, "I've killed more Reds than you killed at the front, so shut your mouth." Sanger's often made out to be kind of a bad figure. He's kind of made a scapegoat. And I think sometimes he gets a little bit of a bad rap because he actually did things to try to help the conditions in the camp. But he had trouble getting along with others, especially those with authority over him. Like Tracy. He and Tracy do not get along at all. He was suspected of being an alcoholic and an opium addict. He had plenty of advantages to get to that, being the head of the medical department at the camp. He had access to all these medicines. He also claimed he suffered from asthma, but I think a lot of that was really he just did not want to be in Elmira. He wanted out of there. One prisoner, Anthony Kiley, who was later the mayor of Richmond, Virginia, described Sanger as a club-footed little gentleman with a normal head and a snaky look in his eyes. Sanger was simply a brute. Kiley had nothing good to say about Sanger. This is a letter Sanger wrote to Brigadier General J.K. Barnes, the Surgeon General. He wrote it November 1st, 1864. And he's talking about the conditions in Elmira. And he's saying these conditions are bad. We need to do something about this. There's too many sick people. We need to find out why so many guys are getting sick. And we need to have better water here. We need to have better food. We need to have more medicine. If he was such an evil person, then why is he trying to improve the conditions in the camp? So he cited all the problems that the camp fought with John, including the water, the number of deaths, all the scurvy, the poor diet, lack of supplies. He was constantly banging heads with Tracy because he would ask Tracy for supplies, and Tracy was very slow in getting them to him. And he was frustrated by his communication with Tracy. Tracy eventually placed Sanger on house arrest within the camp on December 11th. eventually on December 22nd, he's replaced by a new doctor, Dr. Scott. And Sanger went off to serve in Detroit. His name was Joseph Booker. And after the war, he had a pretty good medical career in the state of Maine, which is where he's from. But another problem between Tracy and Sanger was in October of 1864, there was supposed to be an exchange of some prisoners from Elmira, about 1,500 men who were too sick to really be of any value to the Confederates right away. They would be paroled from Elmira and sent south. But they told them in the directions, don't send anybody who's not fit for this trip. Well, Sanger didn't pay any attention to it and approved guys to be paroled who were not really well enough to go on this trip. And some of them died on the way. And when they got to Baltimore, Maryland, the doctors found these prisons in such terrible shape, they were furious. It made the North look bad. It made Hoffman look bad. It made Stanton look bad. And Stanton was furious as well. And they thought that maybe Sanger and Tracy should be court-martialed for not really following orders. They never did follow up on it. But Tracy blamed Sanger for this. And felt he did it on purpose to make him look bad. So he and Sanger did not get along at all. The problem with all this is at the same time this is happening in December, smallpox is starting to hit the camp of Elmira. And instead of vaccinating people, isolating men, checking to make sure people have been inoculated, they're doing nothing because they're too busy fighting. And guys are dying because of it. This is the first commandant of the camp. He's the guy who handled the day-to-day operations of the camp of the prisoners. Henry Colt. He was the brother of the guy who invented the Colt revolver. Colt was had an injury, and that's why he was assigned to work here at the camp for a while. And he was well liked by the prisoners. They thought he was tough, but he was fair, and they could talk to him, and they respected him. In fact, one guy, when he escaped, he wrote Colt a letter when he got back to Richmond, Virginia. Hey, I made it. Thanks for letting me stay in your hotel at Elmira. And Colt just laughed, and he was just glad the guy was okay. He was well liked for everybody. There were a number of problems with the camp. When the first prisoners arrived, many of them weren't really dressed very well. They had shirts and underwear. Many didn't have shoes. Many were very unhealthy when they arrived. Many were suffering with scurvy already, or one of the big killers in the camp was diarrhea and dysentery, which is the big killer in the Civil War. This is an eyewitness description of the first arrivals at the camp, telling how they had different types of uniforms on. Some of them had nothing on but the drawer, they had no pants. They were pale and emaciated, hollow-eyed. I mean, these guys were not good. Many of them had great sores, big enough to see what their arms were. The sores were because they'd been vaccinated. When you look out in Maryland, and the vaccination patch was bad. Instead, they got these lesions on their arms that were very, very bad. And a lot of guys even more sick. Here's Foster's Pond today in the camp. Doesn't look much better than it did back then. I don't think I want to take a drink of water out of it, that's for sure. You can still see this pond there today. And like I said, this is a source of pollution for their well water. All kinds of stuff got dumped in there. It was pretty nasty. And this guy, Barry Benson, who was a prison in the camp, when he first arrived, he said the pond was actually kind of clean. He used to fish on it. But very quickly it became very foul because they were throwing stuff from the kitchen into the pond. There's all this urine going into the pond from the sinks, other chemicals were being thrown in, and the pond became just very, very polluted. Prisoners testified that day's ration of food consisted of a couple slices of bread, a little bit of meat, tiny soup, with mostly broth, a little meat for beans. The soldiers complained that if there was any meat in that soup, they put it on a string and dangled it in there for a second, and that was about it. They didn't seem to find too much of it in there. Barry Benson again described the food. He said the daily life in Elmira was like clockwork. We got roll call, breakfast at 8. And we had pork some days, beef other days. Some days we had bean soup for dinner. Some days vegetable soup. The vegetable soup was made of like compressed, dried vegetable. Pressed into a ring and put it in water and boiled it. And it didn't taste very good. So it looked like a plug of tobacco. And they preferred the bean soup over the vegetables. A couple prisoners in their diaries wrote about life at Elmira. He said, my prison fare at Elmira was about the same as our Army fare. And that was probably true. Confederate Army didn't have much food. These guys aren't eating much. They sometimes go 3 or 4 days with nothing to eat in the Confederate Army. So they're not getting, the Confederate soldier was rail thin. One of the complaints people made about the movie Gettysburg, you've never seen that, was that some of the soldiers in there weren't very authentic. They had guys who were rather portly who were Confederate soldiers. You didn't have too many portly Confederate soldiers. These guys were starving. Another guy said the food was reasonably good. Can't say I had plenty. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, Colonel Hoffman, wanted to retaliate against the prisoners' quotes happening in Union prisons in places like Andersonville. So he ordered a 20% reduction in rations on June 1st, 1864. And then discontinued coffee with breakfast on July 1st, 1864. That was making people, they had no coffee anymore. On August 18th, while Elmira was going on, and for a while they had a bread and water diet to retaliate for Union soldiers in Confederate prisons. On August 10th, another order comes down saying any clothing, food, or other items sent to prisons by relatives is given only to those prisoners officially listed as sick. If you're not in the hospital as a sick soldier, you don't get these things. If your family sends you some stuff, you're not getting it. So, it just sent a letter. One prisoner complained that it's kind of sad to see these provisions that they could be getting were just sent off in a wagon, went to somebody else, they didn't get them. Eventually, the sutler in the camp would sell things. Prisoners had money that was confiscated when they came to the camp. But that money was kept record of, and they could use it as credit for the sutler. So they could go to the sutler and buy extra things, like food. Well, now they're being told, sutler can't sell any food anymore. Not going to happen. A lot of these guys are sick, and they're not getting enough food. That's really not helping them any, improving their health. The sutler could sell them things like soap, a toothbrush, a comb, stamps for postage, and tobacco. You get tobacco. That was about it, no food, at least for a while. Another order by Tracy said all the beef coming to the camp will be inspected. If we found it to be inferior, will be rejected. A lot of meat that was rejected. Again, this is really just part of that retaliatory effort. What happened to meat that was rejected? Rejected meat was sold to local markets to Elmira citizens. Apparently it wasn't too bad for them, but we said to be not good enough for these Confederate soldiers. The fact that these guys are starving can be seen by the fact that they're eating rats. They're trading in rats in the camp. So they catch rats by farming the pond and sell them to people, and they would cook them and eat them. They also would take the fur off of them and make gloves and mittens out of them and sell them to people. Here's a guy who's photographed in the Elmira prison. This guy's wearing a barrel shirt for the day because he ate a dog. There's a guy that came into the camp who would bake bread for the camp. He was a citizen in Elmira. And he had this rather large, fat dog. Well, one day he called his dog, and he didn't answer, and he didn't come back. And come to find out, the prisoner said the son of the dog is turned into a meal. So they were punished for eating the dog. I mean, you don't eat rats, and you don't eat dogs if you're getting enough food. Obviously, these guys are not getting fed enough. Here's another picture showing men wearing barrel shirts as a punishment. This guy's signing his barrel says he's the thief. One prisoner wrote that scurvy, typhoid, pneumonia, and smallpox broke out along the extent, carrying out the great numbers of the poor fellows. These are some of the chief illnesses in Elmira. A lot of prisoners are housed in tents in this overcrowded camp. And this winter of 1864 to 65 was especially hard, much like the winter we just had. Very, very cold weather. And these guys were in tents until like in early January before the barracks were finished. Very, very cold out. And we usually had about 4 or 5 men per tent. Here's a Harper's Weekly sketch of the camp. It's kind of a rather benign view of the camp. It makes it look like it was a pretty nice place, but it really wasn't. The top 3 killers in Elmira were dysentery, pneumonia, and smallpox. The highest deaths were in these months here, and this is when you have smallpox epidemic break out. It actually starts to hit in December. The first 4 guys who died of smallpox, they kind of kept quiet by burying them inside the camp. They wouldn't even take them outside the camp to bury them. Woodlawn Cemetery was the other. He was buried in the camp. And it continues to get worse. This guy, escaped slave, John Jones, was living in Elmira, and he was put in charge of burying all the soldiers at the prison camp. He made a deal with Colonel Tracy that he could charge $250 to bury each soldier. Now, Hoffman didn't want Tracy to do that. Hoffman wanted to pay him like $40 a month. Pay him about a month. Well, Jones made this contract with Tracy, charging $250 for each soldier. Jones became the wealthiest African American in Elmira and in the surrounding area because of this, because he's going to bury thousands of Confederate soldiers at $2.50 each. But he carefully recorded their name, rank, and company, attached to the coffin. He also put inside a glass bottle, put it under their armpit, inside the coffin, so they can be identified. This guy very respectfully, very carefully buried all his men. He's a runaway slave. Here's his home in Elmira, and here it is today. It's being turned into a museum. We're restoring the house. It's right near Woodlawn Cemetery where the Confederate soldiers are buried. Here's another shot of the house from the different. Here's the cemetery. Men were buried in trenches. The ground was pretty marshy here, so they're inside these wooden coffins, and the trench often filled up with water. So the coffin was floating, so they took their pickaxe and punched holes in the sides with filled with water, sink to the bottom, and they shoveled the dirt on top of it, buried in this dirt. So this is how the cemetery looks today. And each tombstone for the Confederate soldiers is appointed top, so you can tell the difference between that and the Union stone which is around the top. I've had people always tell me, oh, you know why they're pointed, don't you? And the answer is, because damn Yankees don't sit on their tombstone. That's just an apocryphal story. It's not true. It's just pointed because it's easy to distinguish the Confederate grave from the Union grave. Interesting enough, when you drive by there Memorial Day that we had recently, they put American flags on all these graves. Which I thought was kind of interesting that they did it. Down south, they used to put Confederate flags on them. Here in Elmira, they put American flags on all those graves. Probably the guys in those graves would turn over if they knew there was an American flag flying on their grave. That's how the cemetery looked in the 1880s. Wooden markers, you can see some of them have fallen down here. A little bit of disrepair. It was the early 1900s to put all those marble stones. And this is a mark where they're talking about John Jones and how he was a runaway slave, and he very carefully buried all these men. Some Southerners came up here thinking, by God, I'm going to bring my loved one home and not have him out there in this Yankee cemetery. And they got up here and found out what a beautiful cemetery it is, and they decided to leave him. Some soldiers were buried unknown. They didn't identify. In fact, almost half of the soldiers in the Civil War are buried in unknown graves. They couldn't identify. No one wore dog tags. They had trouble identifying bodies. So almost half are in unknown graves. Some families put in their own stone that told more information about the person, like where they were from, when they were born, and all that kind of stuff. Here's another one that the family put it. One of the prisoners Jones had to bury had a familiar name. Jones had run away from the Elsie plantation in Leesburg, Virginia. The overseer was a guy named William Rollins. And now here he is burying John R. Rollins, the son of William Rollins. And when John Jones was a slave on that plantation, he remembered this little kid, this little 3-year-old, running around on that plantation. And now he's burying him in Elmira. Later the family came and removed John Rollins and took him back to Virginia to be buried. This is a monument in Woodlawn Cemetery put in by the Confederate, United Daughters of the Confederacy. Put this monument in 1937 to honor all the dead Confederate soldiers who died at Elmira. This monument's there because of a tragedy that happened. It's a hollow monument. 49 Confederate soldiers were killed on a train wreck. They were coming on the Erie Railroad, and they were traveling through Pennsylvania, and there's one track, and the telegrapher who was supposed to kind of control the trains and the track made a mistake. He was hung over from drinking too much the night before. And he allowed a coal train to come through at the same time he sent this train of Confederate soldiers through. And the two trains hit head on, and these guys got killed because of this guy's mistake. The some of the Union Guards. They buried them right along the side of the railroad tracks, but by the early 1900s, those graves were being overgrown and forgotten. People thought this was terrible, we should honor these men better than this. They dug up what remains they could find and brought them to Elmira, and they put this monument here. And on the monument, they identified some names. There were a lot of people they couldn't identify, but their remains in the line. Here's a picture again of the prison camp, the tents, close to the fence here. Here it is again when the barracks get built. The tents are finally taken away because they build wooden barracks that would all be come in. You can see some supplies being brought in by wagon. Guys are milling around here. There's some blankets being hung out to dry. Elmira actually was a pretty escape-proof place. There were not too many escapes from Elmira, but there were some. The reason there weren't too many is because, unbeknownst to them, in the midst of these Confederate soldiers was a Union spy who was posing as a Confederate soldier, Melvin Conklin. And he was reviewing some of the plans of these guys to escape. So there weren't too many escapes out of Elmira because he helped them cover. After the war, he stayed in Elmira, got married, and was a postmaster for many years in Elmira. Here's some of the men who dug a tunnel and escaped. This one here is Barry Benson. Here's that picture of him again. These guys dug their way out using spoons and knives. The way they figured out, they were in a tent, and they needed to know how far they would dig to get underneath the fence. So they began throwing stones towards the fence. Pretend they were playing a game, see who could get the closest. When they thought the guards weren't looking, they finally tied a string on the stone, tossed it to the fence, reeled it in, figured out they needed to dig about 66 feet to make it outside. So they started digging. They cut a square piece of turf out of their tent and started tunneling under. They put the square back every night to cover it up. But these guys took turns going in this tunnel. Only one person could fit through the time. And they dug their way out. And finally broke out. In the early hours, about 3 o'clock in the morning, they got out. And the plan was they would all kind of go together, but once they got outside, they kind of got separated and they all went their own way. Benson made his own way back down south. And all these guys got away. One got caught. 2 other guys walked from Elmira to Ithaca. On the way, they stopped in Newfield and lady in the farmhouse gave them a nice meal. Once they got there, they took a train to Auburn. They got jobs as machinists there, made some money, and then they got on trains and rode back south. And other guys did the same thing. They kind of worked their way back south. There was one guy who escaped from Elmira, got all the way to Canada, and he worked up there for a while. He was trying to get boat passage to go to back south, but they couldn't do it because of the blockade. No ships would take them south. So he finally went back to Elmira and knocked on the front door and let them back in. But by that time the war was almost over, and I think he knew that because he knew that when the war ended, they're going to send him home for free. These guys had this plan they started with 5 men, eventually recruited others. They were digging too tough. They made bags out of some shirts they sewed together, and they would dump the dirt into their foster's pond, and they dug their way out of it. Here's the tunnel. I showed you this picture before. They tunneled out right here on the Water Street. And then they all took off in different directions. 2 of the guys crossed the river and were sitting on top of Mount Zora Hill on the other side of over here somewhere on the inside of the river. And they could hear the commotion of the camp, and they're looking for these guys. This time they're watching. Another prisoner hid in a barrel of swill from the kitchen and went out to the camp on a wagon. Just popped out the barrel and took off. Another guy borrowed a book from one of the guards in the camp, and he opened the book up and lo and behold, there's a blank pass. So he practiced the signature of the officer of the day at the gate and forged his signature and handed the pass and walked right out the gate. And never came back. One guy stole a sergeant's long overcoat and walked through the front gate unchanneled because they thought he was a Union soldier. Walked right out. That's why, like, when the guys went to the smallpox camp, they had to burn their clothes. The only thing they had to give them were Union outfits like this. So when they gave them a coat like this, they usually cut off the bottom of it. So you could tell it's not a regulation Union uniform. So that didn't happen. But this guy got a full coat and walked right on. His coat was all the way down to your ankles back. This guy had an interesting way of getting out. He He was in a smallpox hospital, and he told some guys to get some flour and he put all over his hands and his face. And he went to the dead house, and they had him put him in the coffin. And told him to nail the coffin lid very loosely shut. Make sure he got put on top of the wagon. That's what they did. And on the way to the cemetery, he suddenly burst out of the coffin and yelled, "Come to judgment!" And the driver was a black man. Some say it was John Jones, others say it wasn't. I'm not really certain if it was Jones or not. But, the driver ran away because he was scared to death. And, the other guy ran in another direction. He got away. So Jimmy Jones escaped by pretending he was dead. Altogether, 17 men managed to escape from Elmira, but compared to other camps, that was actually pretty good. Elmira is not a work camp. These guys don't have much to do, unless they want to. They could do work, they could volunteer to do things like help build the barracks, or work in the kitchen, or help with the dispensing medicines and stuff. And they got paid 5 cents a day to do that. And they also could get extra meals, extra food as a result of that too. But if you didn't choose to do that, you had nothing to do all day long. So here's some guys with a drawing made of some better soldiers. Those a lot of them don't need shoes on. They're just kind of hanging around in the camp. Here's the flagpole. Here's the observatory. People up there peeking at them. Some of them made things. They sold them in town. Like they made bracelets out of horsehair. Horsehair and horse's tail, and weave it together and make things like they give them to the guards would sell it in town, and then they would get a cut of it. Of course, the guards got to keep some for themselves. It was a pretty big business when they would carve rings out of bones and stuff like that. So if someone brought their horse in the camp, they'd be careful because these guys would get next to the horse and start plucking hairs out of the tail because they want to make stuff out of it. These are some deep bone items that were carved at Elmira by this guy, George Davis. Good stuff he's doing here was nice. They did have some religious services. Thomas K. Beecher was the minister for Park Church in Elmira. He's the half-brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote up Thomas Abbott. And he would come to the camp and lead religious services. And the Beecher family were well-known abolitionists. The president actually liked Thomas K. Beecher. Colonel Stephen Moore would take over for Major Colt when he left to go back to active duty again. And Moore also was well liked with the prisoners. He allowed them to have a band that would play each night when the flag was lowered, and then he would let them play some of their southern music if they wanted to. They could play Dixie after that if they wanted to. Sometimes they had dances in their camps, in their barracks. Here's some of the soldiers having a dance. Sometimes they had fist fights over who was going to be the woman. Colonel Tracy was told on February 4th, 1865, the war's winding down here now. He was starting to empty out the prison keep. He was told to make preparations to exchange 3,000 prisoners. They started to be shipped out in groups of 500 after they took an oath of allegiance. You didn't get out if you don't take that oath of allegiance. Now, some Confederate soldiers refused to take it. They already taken an oath of allegiance to the Confederacy. They didn't believe it was right to take another oath different than that. They'd already made a promise they can't break it. But you could get out anytime you wanted to if you took this oath of allegiance. And some Confederate soldiers did. But they weren't being transported back, so they took jobs working for local farmers in Elmira. Trying to make some money so they could earn some money to get back to the South. This is at Point Lookout, Maryland. Some men are taking the oath of allegiance here. Above them is a gigantic American flag. They did this in Elmira too, in the mess hall where they got their meals. They had huge flags hanging on the ceiling over their heads to remind them that they were traitors to the United States. As the war ended, the rest of the prisoners were released, started on May 15, 1865. Eventually, they're all out of camp early July. Actually, there was one prisoner who stayed until September because he was too sick to travel. The camp officially closed on July 10, 1865. Many free prisoners went into town to get haircuts and shaves, and bought clothes, and went to restaurants to get decent meals. This is a neat picture. This guy here, his name is Marcus Coney, had some money, and he paid to have the picture taken of he and some of his fellow Confederates at the train station getting ready to be shipped back south. It's the only picture I know of Confederate prisoners from Elmira. The little boy who's supposedly living here. Here's the Union Barracks, all boarded up now. The plant's been closed here. A lot of these buildings eventually were purchased and moved by other people. And used, one guy used it as a cottage along the Chemung River in Elmira. Some of them became part of houses like this. The main part of the structure here was once one of those buildings in the prison. People always ask me, was Elmira as bad as Andersonville? And here's Andersonville. And my answer to that is no, it's not as bad as Andersonville. It was bad, but it's not as bad as Andersonville. Here's some prisoners Union prisoners who survived Andersonville. This guy was still alive. And I showed you a picture a moment ago of some Confederate prisoners leaving Elmira. It didn't look like this. Andersonville was pretty bad. The scale of Andersonville was just very, very large. Here's Camp Douglas near Chicago. Around 4,500 died. It's more than Elmira. Elmira, about over 3,000 died. The death rate here was 17%. Camp Douglas was not very good either. Nearly 3,000 prisoners died in Elmira. The death rate was 24%. In comparison to other northern camps, the rate was about 12%. So Elmira is about double the rate. Andersonville, 13,000 dead compared to 3,000. The scale of Andersonville is just much larger. Nearly 30% death rate compared to 15% overall in southern Kings. So again, it's about double the normal rate of death in southern Kings. Here's Elmira with a 24% death rate. Over 2,900 men died in Elmira. A look at Salisbury Prison in North Carolina, 33% death rate, 32% at Andersonville, almost 30%. Death rates in these camps were very, very high. And then it's Johnson's Island in Sandusky, Ohio, 2% death rate. Why is that one so low? Because this was a camp for officers only. They had money, so they could buy extra food. Their families were sending them things. They could survive the camp more easily. See that the death rate in these southern camps were pretty high. Why was the virus so lethal? One cause is common, polluting the water and spreading more disease, more diarrhea, more dysentery. Reduced rations is helping these men who are sick and broken down already when they're arriving at the camp. Lack of proper housing and medical care at first. We saw these guys were in tents and cold out. Improper clothing, lack of blankets. A lot of these guys had one blanket. That was it. And diseases like smallpox, dysentery, typhoid, and so on were really infecting a lot of men. Big killers are here. Diarrhea, dysentery, pneumonia, eruptive fevers, which is usually smallpox, but also include measles. And this shows in Elmira how many sick prisoners each month and how many died each month. This is historian James McPherson. He writes that Confederate prisoners were 29% less likely to die in Yankee prisons than die of disease in their own camps. Union prisoners were 68% more likely to die in southern prisons than in their own army. So, was Andersonville, was Elmira worse than Andersonville? My answer to that question is no, it was not. But it still wasn't very good, but not as bad as Andersonville. This is a historical marker on Water Street, Elmira, that shows the location of the camp. Here's a marker that was put down in the early 1900s to show the boundaries of the camp. You can see these in people's front yards and their homes in Elmira. Here's the Elmira Water Board on Windsor Avenue. There's a monument there about the camp with some pictures and stuff about it on the monument. It's right near this site that they're going to put in a building from the camp on the grounds of the camp. Here's the monument that has the flagpole. This is the grounds of the camp today. It's right along the Chemung River. There's nothing there. Before the camp was located there, this was a horse racetrack. Race horses. Today, this is the building that they've identified that we're pretty sure was part of the camp. They've disassembled it. This is it being delivered to the site. This is behind the water board building right here on Windsor Ave. And they're going to put this building back together. They've already started it. And they're hoping that by sometime in July it's going to be completed. It's going to become like a historical museum about the prison camp. And we hope will generate more interest about the camp. The guy who's the president of the Friends of the Elmira prison camp got a letter from somebody from South Carolina, some woman, and she said, "Don't you dare glorify what happened at Elmira in this prison." So there's still some hard feelings about Elmira prison camp to this day. On August 6, 1914, a guy was digging a basement on Gould Street. His name was Almond Gould. And he hit something wooden when he was digging. The pine box. Inside the pine box was the body of a person. And he opened it up, it smelled horrible. And inside was a pipe, tin cup, tin plate, a few other articles. And also he had been buried in lime, which indicates the person died of some very contagious disease. I mentioned how some of the first guys who died of smallpox were buried in the camp. Well, they were later moved to cemetery. Apparently, not everybody was. Apparently, this guy got left behind. We wonder how many more are buried in the ground inside of that prison. This is 50 years after the camp. We found this guy. Prison camp and memory. There's different Civil War memories. One is the lost cause. It's the southern version of the war. They believe that they fought a valiant effort and that they shouldn't be ashamed of it. They fought a great lost cause. And then there's the Unionist interpretation. The war was fought to save the Union. This is very much a northern interpretation of the war. There's an emancipation interpretation. It's basically the African American interpretation of the war. The war was fought to end slavery. And then there's the reconciliation interpretation. Reconciliation is the idea by the 1890s it kind of get started that both sides really fought a valiant war. We should celebrate what both sides did in the war, and we're all Americans and should all be friends again. According to the lost cause, the South fought this very honorable war. The South only lost because the North had more men and materials. The South had treated Union prisoners well and kept their camps healthy despite the difficulties caused by the Union blockade. The North is to blame for the POW problem. It was the North who suspended the prisoner exchange. It's their fault for doing it. They don't make any mention of the fact that they weren't treating African American prisoners the same, and that was the problem. It's all the North's fault. The North purposely starved prisoners in their camps. There was plenty of food available. This is all part of a lost cause interpretation of the war, the POW situation. In 1876, there was a bill introduced in the House of Representatives that wanted to provide amnesty to all Confederate soldiers. Excuse them and let them be citizens again. This guy, James T. Blaine, put an amendment to that bill that said amnesty for all except for Jefferson Davis. Because of what Jefferson Davis did at Andersonville to those Union prisoners. When he got done with his speech, he sat down and there was huge applause in the gallery of the House. Well, Benjamin Hill gets up. He was a friend of Jefferson Davis. He says this. This is what Blaine said. This is the amendment to the amnesty bill. He blames Davis for the gigantic murders and crimes at Andersonville, and they applauded his plain and finished his speech. But Hill gets up. He says he has a letter from a surgeon in Elmira prison. He quoted from the letter. The dying other allowances by the government to use the prisoners for ample, yet the poor and unfortunate were allowed to starve. Out of the number of prisoners, over 3,000 have now laid buried in the cemetery located near the camp for that purpose. Mortality equal, if not greater than that of any prison in the South. Not true. The range of mortality is no less in Elmira than Andersonville. Not true. This is the problem with reading things about prisons in the Civil War. You can't always believe everything everybody said. Because after the war, there's this big argument about each side pointing fingers at the other about blaming them for Andersonville, blaming them for Elmira. And everyone says the other side's the one who's was the bad guy. And they sometimes totally fabricate things, like we see here. You have to be careful when you read literature about prison camps in the South and North, because not everything you're going to read is true. Thomas Platt gets up, he demands that Hill provide the name of his source. Platt says, I live 36 miles from Elmira, and those statements are unqualifiedly false. Benjamin Tracy, who's now a lawyer in New York City, reads about this in the papers. He writes to Platt telling him the conditions of the camp were well policed and kept perfectly clean. the calendar age to prevail is not owing to neglect or want sufficient medical attention, but to other and quite different causes. Doesn't really say what those causes were, and he tries to absolve himself and he kind of blame. James Garfield, the future president of the United States, brings a letter from Quartermaster John Elwell, who worked at Elmira. He says, I furnished the prisoners at Elmira with the same rations, coffee, tobacco, coal, wood, etc., as were given to our soldiers. Not true. As we already saw, and sometimes denied them food and things. They were not equipped the same as Union soldiers. This is Clay Holmes, who published a book about the camp in 1912. He says the purpose of the finding was to provide information for the present generation, facts that are known and have been substantiated regarding the expeditions and consistent in the prison camp at Elmira. The reputation of these charges is important to the defense of the citizens of Elmira who are loyal not only to the country but to the principles of Christian humanity. Holmes wanted to exonerate Elmira for any blame for what happened at the camp. He says that we tried to provide for these guys as best we could. It's not our fault, essentially. Michael Horrigan, who wrote a book about the Elmira prison camp, he said the decision made by the War Department carried by ranking officers in Elmira were the major cause of the camp's high death toll. So he's saying that they were to blame for what happened to the Union soldiers who were invading the camp, really did a poor job, and they retaliated against these guys. They're to blame for what happened. James Gillespie, who wrote Andersonville in the North, takes a very different view. He basically says, well, it's just the misfortunes of war, not any systematic Yankee cruelty and neglect. It just happened. These guys didn't intentionally try to hurt these guys. This guy, Charles Sanders, finally names the enemy, also sides with Oregon and basically says that these guys died from the effects of overcrowding, poor sanitation, inadequate medical care, starvation, needless exposure to the elements of contagious diseases. Causes of the deaths were manifestly clear to those who find that they knew this was happening, they did nothing to stop it, that they're to blame for it. Probably the most balanced view is by Michael Gray in Business of Captivity about the Elmira prison camp. He does talk about the inadequate clothing, blankets, diets, and so on. He also points out a lot of these guys were broken down health when they arrived there, and he doesn't really see it as an intentional thing that was done. Thanks for coming tonight. I have to give my wife Cindy some credit for taking some of the pictures you saw on here. She's my photographer. These are some other talks I give as well, about other topics. So, thank you very much for having me. I want to thank Emerson for inviting me. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
It sounds like you're trying to avoid taking a strong position on this, but Andersonville statistics are higher, but some have argued that that's because food is shorter in the South in general.
Yes.
Certainly. Rather than the deliberate policies such as that of Tracy of just saying, oh, you're not going to eat, or
right.
your relatives can't buy food for you, or the local council can't sell food for you. Does that hold up?
The South does have an excuse in that they couldn't feed their own army. So they're having trouble feeding these prisoners of war as well. However, there was food in Georgia, for example. I mean, before this, Sherman hadn't gone through Georgia yet. There was food in Georgia that's going up north to Lee and his army. It's not being sent to those prisoners of war. So, kind of a decision being made there as well. Yeah, the South was strapped. They're going to blame the North blockade and their shortages for it. But yeah, that was a problem for them.
Did you see that Stanton? Do you see Stanton as one who promoted that policy of deprivation and starvation?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. However, he would exchange prisoners if he thought it would give the North an advantage. So there were times when prisoner exchange was suspended, he would sometimes suddenly exchange the prisoners. He thought it would help the North out. So he didn't always stick to it just because they weren't treating the black soldiers the same. So it wasn't always just about the race issue. Stanton definitely was a problem. Any other questions? No, I'll say one over here at the bottom.
Actually, the guards in Emerson, appreciated, feel fed as universities.
They weren't being fed as well, but they were getting more than the person.
They weren't
But
helping.
they weren't getting enough, no. So not, you need a certain number of calories per day, they're not getting. I mean, the Confederate soldier in the Army's not getting. Yeah, that was an issue. Any other questions? Really?
Did a great job.
Thank you very much.
All right. You've given us so much, we don't know what to ask.
A lot there, a lot more to learn there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gary.
Yep.
Very informative, very interesting. Hope you read the book.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up? If not, please stay. There's a lot of refreshments here. Enjoy the refreshments. Enjoy the time of just visiting together. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Is the June meeting here? Is that what you said?
Pardon?
Is the June meeting
No,
here?
it's June meeting's at the time.
Okay. It's fourth Wednesday as usual. What's it about?
It's the Kansas Community.
Oh, right. Okay. I already asked. I totally asked Carol Henry that at the beginning and I already forgot. It's on my calendar anyway
Oh, yeah.
Really?
I know. Oh, that's right, I have to do this. Yeah, I have to ask myself.